So am I audible clearly now?
Yep. Yes.
All right. Excellent. So, hi everyone. Very excited to be, as I said, part of this. And here is a little bit of an overview of what I do. I've been a lifelong learner, a consultant, and I'm learning to be an illustrator. I've been an author of a blog for about 14 years. I've written 3 books. I've been coaching a lot of people in my capacity as a business leader. My previous assignment was that I was leading a 700 people strong organization in India as a country managing director. I'm currently on board of a couple of companies as a non-executive director. So I do a lot of executive coaching, leadership development, etc. My mission is to enable high performance through a combination of coaching and consulting, capability building, leadership development, and visual thinking is something that I now add to that mission. I started sketchnoting, or my journey in visual thinking really started in 2015 when I stumbled upon one of my friends, Abhijit Bhaduri, who creates prolific sketch notes. And so I joined him on the journey, and I've created about 500 sketch notes on different ideas on leadership, learning, and change. And I've been sharing it quite freely on my blog as well as on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. And the response has been really humbling, and that's something that brings me here. I believe that journey is the destination and every step along the way counts. So I'm not too fixated on the goals. My tools for creating what I create is, apart from technology like iPad and Apple Pencil and Procreate, I try to bring my left and right brain in equal proportions, and I think that's the fundamental of that's very fundamental to visual thinking, because it's not art. It is a way to think. It's a way to do better. And some of my tips, I would now change this, but my tips are that everybody can draw, that practice makes us better, that we need to learn passionately, put what we learn to good use, share generously, and really be the change that we wish to see in the world. So that's a little bit about myself. I would move on. The goals for us in this session is to understand the power of visual thinking as a powerful tool to coach people and build leaders. Use really simple drawings and visual metaphors to communicate leadership concepts, and I would spend some time on visual metaphors, and then be able to build our visual coaching capability in terms of when you are talking to your team members, when you are helping them grow, when you're helping them be better, then you can use visuals to connect, clarify, communicate, and really contribute to their competence as leaders and as individuals. We'll take about 55 to 60 minutes for this session, and then I would like to have a lot of question and answers. So I would like to keep it really interactive that way. And we'll also do a lot of draw along activities as we go from here. So I would like to start with the story. My first brush with visual thinking was in year 2002, early part of 2002. The world was still coming to terms with the September 11 attacks in US. The company that I was working with, lost all the customers because the funding dried up and stuff like that. I was laid off. That was really the low point in my career. Fortunately, that point came in very early in my career. So I had a lot of space to experiment with myself. So when I was laid off and having nothing else to do, and really struggling to find my next opportunity, when I was laid off, I was a software developer. I was an expert in Oracle, Visual Basic, Developer 2000, and those classic technologies. And I was always very good at writing, and writing came really naturally to me. And so I, in a silent moment, I created an inventory of my skills. I said, what do I know and what can I offer to this world? And I saw that there were no absolute opportunities in technology. There were no absolute opportunities in writing per se, but when I did this inventory of skill set, I realized that there is a small intersection between my skill set that that can probably become an anchor for me to reinitiate my corporate journey. And that intersection was the intersection between technology and writing, the intersection between understanding of how software is built, what processes are followed, what are the best practices, architecture, etc., etc., etc. And combining that with writing was how I got into my corporate career. And this was also the first time that I used Venn diagram outside of the school. And in a real sense, it sort of contributed to my career. This was my first brush with visual thinking. Many years later, about 5 years back, when I was leading this 700 people organization, a senior leader in the technology area from one of my teams walks up to me and says that how do I grow? Now that is a very generic question, but when people ask generic questions, I treat them as opportunities to coach them, opportunities to really shape their thinking in small or big way. And that's exactly what I did. So what I did was I don't know what happened. I just walked up to the whiteboard and I created something of this sort. And this is a recollection of that image from my memory, which I've recreated. And I said something in tune of, if you try to climb a mountain straight up, it will wear you down, which means if you really want to grow and you really need to then pursue breadth, which is that you work in technology for a few years, then do project management, go into operations, do consultative selling, face the customers, and then you are in a position to lead. And this image stuck with him for a long time. And and after this conversation, nothing really changed for the person. However, after a year and a half, the person walks up to me again and says that, hey, I've taken a lateral move in the organization from technology into, pre-sales consulting. And I had forgotten about the conversation I had with the gentleman, but he didn't. He remembered, and so that was my second aha moment, that sometimes all the articles or books or content that you share with people may not help them. And sometimes just a single scribble on the whiteboard without any prior thinking, just shared that way, sticks in the brain, because that's the power of visuals. That's the power of how visuals can connect people with ideas. And this was my second interesting experience with visuals. And this was also the time when I was also learning how to sketchnote. I was sort of building my visual thinking muscle. So this really came in handy. And thereafter, there were several coachable moments in my journey where I would walk up and sort of conquer the whiteboard and share what I think about a particular project or a development discussion or learning and development planning. I would just go on the whiteboard and share, and that would work the magic. So visual thinking, as I understood, is a way to use very simple visuals to organize your thoughts, connect ideas to see intersections. And I think this has been a big one for me, because when I read an article or when I want to share a lot of ideas and insights with my team members, very often, words fail to connect ideas, because when you're using only words, you're basically using a sequence of thoughts. The thoughts are linear, and therefore it's very hard to connect the last one to the first one and the second one to the nth one, and visuals, by the way of the spatial layout of ideas, allows me to rapidly and serendipitously see connections, like in those two circles that came together to form a Venn diagram. And it sort of results in an aha moment, both for me, but also for people who I coach, people who I train, people who I help with. It improves the ability to think. It also helps me communicate better. And I lived in Chandigarh, up in the North India for close to 6 years. And the reason I mentioned that is because Chandigarh was designed by a French architect named Le Corbusier. And he said famously that I prefer drawing to writing because there is less room for lies when you draw. And so drawing makes things explicit and clear. And in my case, what I've seen is that my ability to draw has been a driver for my own performance in a corporate context, but it has also helped others. And it has inspired better performances from my team members, from my peers, and everybody who I have been able to connect with visually. So what makes it powerful is the fact that visuals simplify the complex. Visual metaphors, and the reason why they're so powerful is that they allow our brain to fill the gaps. Because, and then we'll talk a little bit about how it fills the gaps. It enables synthesis and connection of ideas, raises engagement and attention. And there's one more story that I would like to share here is that in year 2008, I was in front of a customer in Finland trying to sell, in a consultative fashion. So I was trying to understand their problem. I was trying to, show a solution to them on a nicely done PowerPoint presentation. And the customer I was talking to, the person I was talking to, the vice president of quality, and this was a 7 a.m. meeting in Finland. And you can imagine it's minus 20 degrees. And, the person I was talking to just goes off. It feels like he's sleeping. He closed his eyes and he wouldn't nod. He wouldn't acknowledge that he's understanding what I'm sharing. And it felt like I was almost talking to a wall. And I don't know what happened in that moment. So I actually turned down the lid of my laptop, pulled out the projector screen, exposed the whiteboard and started drawing the solution. And I said, this is where you're facing a challenge. This is your process and these are the gaps. And I think they were, in early phases of implementing Agile and stuff like that. And the moment I picked up that the marker pen and whiteboard, the gentleman opens his eyes, and not just that, he walks up to me on the whiteboard, grabs another marker pen and starts drawing along with me. And before I knew, we were talking about a solution in a collaborative manner. I was not just talking to him, we were talking to each other, using whiteboard and using whiteboard animation as a way to sort of communicate the ideas. And it sort of immediately raised the attention and engagement. And I think that was very powerful moment for me in my journey, because I was able to I was not just able to close the sale, but I was able to also build a great relationship with the customer over the subsequent years. So there are a lot of benefits of how visual thinking can help with immersive learning, sense making, comprehension, clarity, ease of sharing and communication. I think probably some of these topics may have been covered in the previous sessions as well. So we're wired to think visually. Science says that 90% of information that enters our brain is nonverbal. When we process visual information, 50% of our brain is involved. We process images 60,000 times faster than text. Visuals trigger emotion. So visuals are processed in the same area of the brain that processes emotions. And that's why sometimes when you watch movie and there's a really moving emotional scene, a lot of people are moved to tears. And that's because visuals are processed in the same part of brain that processes emotions. We remember 65% of what we read and see, as opposed to remembering about 35% of what we read. And we are born visual beings. Our education system programs us out of visual thinking, because when we are kids, we first scribble, we first draw, and then very painfully we learn to write. And once we learn to write, we are taken away from drawing in a step-by-step fashion. Visuals are also social objects of conversation and change. What I've seen is that visuals connect people with each other through ideas. Um, Drawing and coloring puts us in a flow state. It's meditative. Writing by hand is essentially human, and it's a great way to connect with other people. It brings that human element back into the world that is primarily dominated by technology. It increases comprehension, improves learning, and the reason why motivational speakers ask us to write our goals is because writing by hand creates neural pathways of possibility. And this is a big deal for me as a leadership development expert and a coach, that when I am able to write things down on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper that I share with the other person, it creates a neural pathway of possibilities, both in my own subconscious system as a contributor and in the subconscious system of the other person as a receiver. And this is a really powerful, this is the why of my journey as a visual thinker, is that it creates pathways for possibility for me. There's a theory of dual coding I mentioned about visuals filling the gaps. So in 1960, Alan Pavio developed a theory about cognitive processing that says that when we write the word, let's say bird, and when we draw the bird at the same time, the process, our brain's dual processing channels are engaged, and there's a connection between the left and the right brain that results in a combinatorial knowledge. And therefore, the gaps that are created by only verbal processing are filled by visual processing. Therefore, words and imagery makes a strong combination for better retention, better understanding, and a very good recall value. I wouldn't spend much time on theory, and we'll get into the actual part of coaching and leadership. How does visual thinking relate to coaching and leadership? And essentially, coaching is about helping people think better. It's about helping people see the possibilities. Leadership, they say that leadership starts with a vision. Leaders are able to see something that others are not able to see. And here we are not talking about just positional leadership, because I think, leadership is irrespective of the position. Leadership is a verb, it's an action, it's an attitude. And leadership starts with a vision that as a contributor in the team, for example, I'm able to see something that nobody else is able to see. I'm able to spot a problem that most people are not able to see. And that vision is essentially the function of our visual brain. Leadership is also about seeing possibilities and bringing those possibilities to life. And, and that's why I think visual thinking is a potent leadership development tool that we don't use enough. If you read the leadership books, if you read the best-selling leadership books, for example, you will see that a lot of leadership books are heavily textual and focused on content and case studies, as opposed to being focused on this dual coding of visual and verbal messaging. So in a way, leaders are coaches, and great coaches enable great leadership. So leadership and coaching are highly interconnected. They're about seeing possibilities and then working together to bring those possibilities to life. Thinking visually facilitates both, primarily because leadership and coaching is about tapping into the head, the heart, and the hands of individuals. Possibilities are brought to life by a combination of head, heart, and hands. By head, what I mean is understanding of ideas, clarity and cognition of what needs to be done, why it needs to be done, how will we do it, and so on. Heart taps into the emotion, because we cannot deliver excellence, we cannot build leaders if you're not able to tap into their heart, their emotions. And finally, hands, because an excellent understanding, a great passion for things is not enough unless we tap into their hands, which is that we inspire them to really act on what they know, what they've understood. And thinking visually is a driver for us to impact the head, heart, and hands of people that we work with. And therefore, that makes visual thinking a really potential development tool. Now, let's get into an exercise and let's draw with our mind. Now, I don't want you to right now grab a pen. I want you to close your eyes and see what comes to your mind when I say a certain word. And then I would love for you to describe what comes to your mind. So what I want you to do is that when I speak the word, see what comes to your mind, see that picture, see that image that comes to your mind, remember it and share it. So what comes to your mind when I say joy? You can either write in chat or you can just unmute yourself and speak.
This is Anu. What comes to mind is a beautifully drawn picture, like, you know, how an artist draws it, as opposed to my scribbles.
Okay, that's wonderful. Anyone else? What comes to your mind when I say joy, joyfulness?
Spending time with family.
Okay, so the image that comes to your mind is family sitting together, a bunch of people sitting together and having, let's say, good food together or traveling together or something of that sort.
Yeah.
For me, it's my son getting excited about something. And in fact, there are, a bunch of comments in the chat as well. Yeah, so but for me, it's my son getting excited, jumping and telling me, what, this happened. Like, yeah.
Wonderful. What comes to your mind, let's say, when I say complexity?
People and their expectation and their level of understanding.
Okay. Confusion.
Dependency.
Catch
I love that Paddy, complexity, Paddy says he thinks of his wife.
Yeah, that wasn't for confusion. That was more for complexity. So yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Wonderful. Politics in workplace, decision making. There are a lot of complex things. I think what is at the heart of visual thinking is to be able to put these images that come to our mind in minimum number of lines in a very simple form to be able to communicate the essence of what you see there. Which is also the reason why I love this particular image, that when you're watching the television, all the images are served to us ready-made. And therefore, they call it an idiot box because it makes us dumb. We are almost outsourcing all that imagination to the ready-made content that's served to us. Versus if you're reading a book, then if a book is just textual, our mind is creating those visual images as we read the book. And that's sort of
kind of interacting with the author.
Yeah, your mind is interacting with the author, and depending on the context that you are in, your interpretation of what the author has written might change, might be different, but that is your interpretation, and that's what makes it powerful. Now, the next exercise that we want to do is that think about some of the challenges that you've experienced when you have been coaching others, or when you were being coached by someone. What challenges have you faced? You can probably write it in chat, or you can share, unmute yourself and share. Okay, articulating the problem statement. Communication gaps. Okay, expected questions from the coach. Finding the basic problem, the root cause.
I have a comment. I think resisting the urge to solutionize for your coachee.
Mhm. Absolutely. Listening is one of the other challenges that I often see leaders face, is that they listen with an intent to sort of respond back and and share their journey rather than trying to understand the journey of the coaching. So yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
Coach need not clearly understand what is coach's problem statement clearly. Absolutely. So essentially, what happens is that when we are in coaching situations, our job as a coach is to understand and simplify that understanding for our coaches. I've seen and experienced a lot of coaching where there is a lot of intellectual stimulation when the coaching is happening, but there is very little of clarity and insight, because either the insights are so many and so densely connected to each other that it's very hard to, as for me as a coachee, for example, or as a performer, it's very hard for me to focus on that one thing that will generate maximum improvement for me, rather than understanding a web of things and not being able to act on any of those. That's, I think, understanding and simplifying is challenge number one. The second challenge is, how do we help performers move mountains of self-imposed resistance? And what I mean by this is that when we are coaching people or when we're helping leaders grow, uh, people are highly programmed by their past experiences, what has worked for them, their family context, and what kind of leadership they have experienced within their own family settings, what kind of behaviors and values and belief systems that they have imbibed during their journey. And a lot of that resistance becomes a barrier for people to really move forward when we are coaching them. The third challenge is that, how do we build performers self-awareness to uncover their potential? And here visual templates like SWOT analysis, internal and external self-awareness, how do we build those elements in the coaching, is, I think, also a big challenge. And then finally, shifting barriers to be able to catalyze their breakthroughs is very important. And we're going to look at some of the tools that we can use, visual tools that we can use when doing the coaching effectively. So we'll now move to visual metaphors. So what do you see here? I mean, if I ask this simple question as to what is it on the screen?
Tree and I think either grass or shrubs.
Yeah. So this is a tree. Yeah, this is a tree. But the real tree doesn't look this way, right? The real tree, if you add a little more details to this, the real tree would look something like this. And if you add more details, branches, maybe leaves, and add a few birds flying above, you will see that you can see a more realistic version of the tree. But the first image is the visual metaphor. It is that when we think about anything, our brain creates an image to relate with. We saw that in the previous exercise, that when you think of joy, you can see a little boy jumping in the air. That's an image that comes to your mind when you think of joy. And the idea of visual thinking is to be able to translate that simple image. We cannot draw the boy as he is, but what we can draw is a version that our mind can relate with at a physical and at an emotional level. And this creates a whole new language of symbols to represent things and emotions that we can leverage in our communication, in our coaching, in our leadership development, in our team interventions, and in our customer interventions as well. Now, it's easy for everybody to guess what's there. The first one is elephant, the second is a bird, the third one is a factory, the fourth one is an umbrella. Now, these are visual metaphors that represent absolute things. They depict the exact thing, right? But when But if I say, what's this? This is a light bulb, which we generally use to represent the aha moment or an idea. But if we add one more layer to it, and we say there's a girl who is thinking about something and gets to the idea, then we can associate multiple concepts to this particular image. Could you name a few that come to your mind when you see this image of girl with a light bulb moment?
She's had a moment of insight.
Had a moment of insight. She has had a moment of inspiration, that there was a spark of creativity, that she found a solution, that she's thinking and she's succeeding with her thinking with some ideas. A flash of brilliance. Yep. What comes to your mind when you see this image? What different concepts come to your mind when you see a road leading to horizon with a shining sun and some birds flying? The journey ahead.
Journey, the sunrise, going from the dark into the light.
Going from dark into light, a bright future, a bright career path ahead. Vision, opportunity, goal, and journey are a few things that can also be related to this image. And then when you see this image, you can think of victory, maybe. What else?
Surmounted a challenge,
Conquest.
surmounted adversity to get to the goal.
Achievement, leadership, success, victory, determination, joyful achievement, absolutely, and so on. So these metaphors that we now have here are representative of multiple things. You can associate multiple meanings to these depending on how you combine the words with the visuals, right? So you can pick any word and use this visual and it will make sense. So these are relative metaphors, one visual having many interpretations. With that, I would love for you to grab the pen and paper and draw a few visual metaphors that come to your mind when I say project, objective, and team. What visual imagery comes to your mind when you think of a project, objective, and a team? Maybe you can draw and either share it on the board, or you can just hold it up and show it on the screen. We'll take 30 to 45 seconds for this one. Okay. Can some of you just show what you were able to come up with? Okay, so there's the objective. Alexandra, you've drawn objective, you've drawn team as a bunch of people. Tim has created an arrow that leads to wonderful. Well, excellent. I think those are all great metaphors for sure. Excellent. So here's what I was able to come up with when I thought about project as a collection of scope, time, cost, and quality cards that connect to each other. the puzzle pieces. You can think of project as a series of steps that you do to achieve an outcome. You can also think about it as spinning wheels. As far as objective is concerned, a road that leads to a destination, a target, a shooting board, etc. And when you look at team, and I think what you will see is that we all share this vocabulary. We didn't agree that we will draw a bunch of people when we look at teams, but we share that image that we create in our mind. When you look at a word and you create an image in your mind, those images is the language that we all know by default, and that is the language that we tap into when we do the visual thinking. Up next, how do we represent confusion, the concept of increase, and the concept of conflict or conflicting situation? Maybe you can take 30 more seconds and then show it on the 30 to 45 seconds and then show it on the screen. Maybe we can see some of what you've come up with. Okay, so there's a light bulb for ideas. There's a light bulb for ideas here as well. If you see the increase, then we have demonstrated that through an upward arrow. Conflict is different shapes, people looking at different directions, confusion over the head of that person, all excellent metaphors. Again, goes on to, yeah, wonderful, Tim. So this goes on to again say that we share that language of visuals. There's a confusion. There are a lot of question marks around the head. From an idea perspective, there is the light bulb, which we saw there. Light bulb coming out of head, light bulb coming out as a result of conversation between two people is all what comes to my mind. Increase, we've seen upward arrow as a common theme, and conflict, we've seen two people facing each other, two people not agreeing with each other. So this language of visual that we share is universal and powerful. And this is what we share. And this is what connects us all at a very fundamental level. Further, I can go on, but in the interest of time, I will just spill it out. So listening, empathy, clarity, and conversation. So the reason why this visual metaphors are important is because when you connect with people in leadership interventions and coaching interventions, trying to explain them something using words versus trying to use visual metaphors are incredibly powerful. There are also a lot of visual templates that you can use on the whiteboard to show the gaps that exist, to show the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threat that people face. So doing personality assessment, strength assessment and stuff like that. So one more visual metaphor that I want all of us to create is that you think of one person that you admired as a leader at work, in your peer group, in your family, people you worked with, your ex-bosses, and think of that one quality in the person that really stood out for you. And then create a visual metaphor for that particular quality and write down what quality that was. I think that will be fun to see what qualities you admire in leadership, and then how do you represent them visually. Maybe we can take 30 to 45 seconds to do this. All right, Surbi has something. Okay, there's a person holding up a banner.
That's my dad, and I think the quality is the courage.
Wonderful.
This is what I tried drawing.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, Deepti has drawn a superhero weathering a storm.
Yeah, I think this leader, I mean, it was nothing that he could not make possible, a man of very less words, but solutions, and then making them happen.
Brilliant. I love what Raki has created, a leader who holds up people. It's a beautiful metaphor of what leadership qualities really look like. Okay. Okay, there is innocence there.
Yeah, so baby is always right. If there is a fight between a baby and parent, then baby always wins. So innocence takes over.
That tells us that we are born leaders and
Yeah.
we are somehow programmed out of it.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Oh, wonderful. Very nice. We move further to the subsequent section in the interest of time. So here is how you can build your visual vocabulary. And this doesn't need to be complex. You can find icons on any keyword that you want to represent visually on the nounproject.com. My submission to you would be to draw a few every day, because when you will practice it daily, you'll build a muscle memory, and then you'll be able to draw it without any references. Search Google Images for clip arts on topics, practice drawing those, refer to other people, other sketch noters who do a lot of this visual work, people who do graphical recording on the topic. And by the way, I'm learning a lot by how Tim is, bringing all those insights together in one on a single page. That's something that I'm very inspired by when I see that. And the key is to learn these visual alphabets, and then just as you learn a new language and practice till it becomes natural for you to create these metaphors. Now, let's look at visual coaching for leadership and development. Hey, by the way, I'll just need to mute myself for a second and step out because I have a kid who's walked into the room. I'll just settle him in a minute and then be back. Sorry about this. Say that when people talk to one another, the world gets constructed. And it often happens that people have a lot of questions in their mind when you're leading a team, or when you're a part of team, or when you are contributing to a team. There are a lot of questions as you start. And then when people start talking, when people start putting sticky notes on the walls, when people start organizing information in a way that they all can see what is happening. Then what happens as a result of all that is alignment. And this is the theory of social construction or social constructivism, which says that when people talk to one another, the world gets constructed. And this is how products are built, solutions are delivered. This is how growth happens. This is how leadership really happens in our context. So when we talk about visuals in coaching and leadership development context, we use visuals to create awareness. This ties into the grow model of coaching. So when we create awareness by encapsulating or sharing wisdom visually with our performers to expand their horizons, to enable them to see a wider world through the power of ideas that are shared visually. And this can be done using visual summaries, sketch notes. This can be done using goal setting conversations and enabling them to see their goals clearly. This can be in form of generative conversations where conversations lead to clarity about what matters to the performer, about what matters to the context, and how do we bridge the gap between what performer needs versus what the context needs and bridge that gap. First step is to create awareness, but the second important step is to contextualize the insights. This is done primarily using visual templates. The one template that I have shown there is a goal setting template, which says that if you want to reach that horizon, here are the milestones that we need to achieve, and here are a few other things that we need to do. Very, very simple templates. This does not have to be really complex, but anything that serves your purpose could be a template that you can use. And we'll look at some of the visual templates in the subsequent section as well. There are self-assessment templates like SWOT analysis, and you can really engage with the performer in terms of raising their self-awareness. What also happens is that what I have seen is that typical performance discussions, typical developmental discussions tend to get really heavy. However, when you do them visually on the whiteboard, they make these coaching conversations really playful. They eliminate anxiety, and the performer really feels included in the conversation. And I had this experience when I was coaching a product development manager who wanted to change the tracks and get into a different line of work or different part of business. And trying to understand and uncover the motivations was all done visually. We adopted a 5 why analysis method to say, why do you want to do this? And, and further drilling down led to more clarity. What also happened was that we identified that if she's here and she wants to go there, there is a huge gap in between that needs to be filled. And we represented that gap visually to be able to identify what are those actions that that she will need to initiate, what are those developmental areas that we need to focus on to be able to really reach that goal in a certain time frame. And that was so powerful that all her performance discussion was basically a whiteboard session that we just clicked a picture of and uploaded it on our performance management system. And that served both as a reference point for us, but also as a way to make that conversation playful, engaging, and inclusive of the performer. Then we help, once the insights are contextualized, we help them execute and act on those insights. And a lot of this is about attention to details and attaching the low-level action items to the high-level purpose that we have set out. And so action tracking and status, individual feedback and course correction, all of this can be done visually. Visual timelines can also help performers keep their priorities visible constantly. And in an individual context, this is helpful, but even in an organizational context, I've worked with organizations where they needed help in creating a strategy story that connects with all the, let's say, 1,800 or 2,000 employees that they have had. And we created a visual storyline that connects the organization's past journey with present moment, with disruptions being faced, the strategic focus areas, and what we do with those strategic focus areas. And this image was then printed in form of a poster that was pasted across the organization on all the desks and all the elevators and everywhere. And that led to significant improvement in our overall score on the strategic alignment across the organization. So visual tools can act as powerful motivators for people to act and serve as reminders for people to really act. Finally, inspecting and adapting, which is to measure the progress, retrospect periodically on how did we do, improve upon what we did. So simple templates like liked, learned, longed for, and lagged could be could be a great way to fill the whiteboard with these 4 sections and a lot of sticky notes in terms of what people really liked about it, what they learned out of it, what they really longed for, and what did we lack as a team, or what that individual lacked in the whole process. It just measures progress, but this also serves as a way to identify improvements that we can do. This also engages, this is about engaging performers on retrospectives. And when we do it in a team setting, then there is, in my view, there is no better way for the team to learn than to be able to reflect back on what they've done, and then for leaders to really facilitate that collective form of learning, which is, I think, very powerful. It's a very tacit form of learning, it's very implicit form of learning that happens when people talk about problems, they talk about improvement ideas. Then you probably don't need improvement plans because people have realized that this is what we need to do. Structure and organization of ideas. Here are some of the ways that ideas can be structured. We've seen, and we'll see also see some examples of how information can be structured in these forms. Visuals can be drawn to represent a path with some milestones along the way, and some details about each milestone. There could be a hub and spoke, one thing and a few more things emanating out of it could be hub and spoke. Then there's a grid layout where there is no particular order, but information is organized in grids and boxes. There's vertical alignment, there's horizontal alignment, there are clouds that you can use to represent information, just encapsulating information within clouds. There is an iceberg where we want to clearly identify what's visible and then what's underneath, which is invisible or intangible. Then we can draw an iceberg. There's a sequence diagram. Then there is a hierarchy where we want to show the order of things. There's a pyramid where we want to show the order of importance from lower to higher. There's a Venn diagram that we already discussed about. Then there's timeline. There's from to diagram, primarily shifting, let's say, the mindset or shifting our priorities or shifting our business model from X to Y. Then there is connected info where 4 puzzle pieces come together, and for anything to succeed, those pieces have to work in tandem with each other. Then you can use connected info as a format. There could be a cyclic representation. For example, reduce, reuse, and recycle is a classic example that comes to mind. There's a tree where we want to show the why of the things at the root of the things, how we do it as the trunk, and what we do as the branches. Then there's a tree structure that we can use. There's funnel. Then there's a step-by-step evolution of things that can be used to represent a process. There's a path again, wherein here the path is towards a certain direction. In the previous one, the path is really just a flow of ideas. But in this case, path leads us to a certain horizon. There could be concentric circles. And we've seen a lot of, most of us would have seen Simon Sinek's Start with Why as a collection of 3 concentric circles. It says why, how, and what. There is cause and effect model that we can use, random order of ideas. And sometimes a lot of meetings that I have facilitated, the ideas don't come in a certain flow. So what we would do is just build a title and then write down the ideas and let those ideas be just circled so that they are physically demarcated as ideas. And then we could then synthesize, connect, and see those ideas. Then there is mind map of things, and generally building mind map of solution-oriented conversation is extremely valuable in business context. And then there's a path or a process that there's a path that looks more like a process. So there are a lot of these different visual templates that we can use to represent information. I will now pull out examples from some of the sketch notes that I have created along these years to demonstrate how some of these organizational structures, informational organization structures can be used. So if you look at a tree, then this is a tree of social selling, which talks about positioning customer and playground at the heart of it, social selling as a mindset, as the trunk, and then techniques include creating, curating, and contributing. There are 6 ways to make sense. Is again a tree, but a tree that is growing out of a human head. This talks about how can we make sense amidst complexity. There's an iceberg. This iceberg model is where when an event happens and we want to drill down on what are the patterns of behavior, what is the structure of the system where this behavior happens, and what are the mental models, beliefs, and values underneath a certain event. When we want to do a sort of root cause analysis of the event in terms of tangible, visible factors and the invisible factors, then iceberg is a great way to do it. And if we divide the iceberg by 2 from the center and say current and desired, then it also provokes a lot of thinking on where we are today and where we should be in terms of these patterns of behavior, or in terms of our structural systems or our mental models, and what kind of belief system we really want to have within the team, within the organization, or with our performers. Then there's a path, and there are 2 kinds of path. One is a path that leads to a rising sun. That's what is our strategic intention, or what is our goal from a performer perspective, and what are different tracks that a performer will really need to focus on. Then we talk about how they will do it, and then we talk about 3 things that they will exactly do to be able to reach to that promised land. In the other example of managing oneself, and this is a classic coaching template that I use with my coaches as well, and especially people who are in transitions looking for a job, people who are moving from one role to another, etc., from one department to another department. We say that Peter Drucker comes to our help, and this is out of a classic Harvard Business Review article called Managing Oneself. But if you read the article, it will not lead to this sort of clarity, because the insights are really linear, and this connects those insights on a path with a checklist of questions and things that you need to consider when you're managing, when you're trying to get into a different reality from where you are today. And this has been immensely helpful in my own coaching interventions as well. Then there is hub and spoke, how to work out loud, how to really feed the community to be able to belong to a community, how to share more to learn more. These are all different experiments with the same form of hub and spoke, where there is a central theme at the center, and then there are insights emanating out of a certain center. And then we look at a grid. It's just a random representation of ideas in a certain form. There is no particular order, which means everything is important. If there is an order, then we can number them. But in coaching competencies, there is no numbering. And these are all the sketch notes that I use quite actively in my coaching interventions as well. So I create them so that I can share it with the world, but also because I can use it in my own coaching interventions. So what you're seeing is an example of structure, but there are also an example of artifacts that we can create for inspiring a better performance from people that we are working with. And so it serves 2 purposes. When I create one sketch note, it serves 2 different and diverse purposes. Then there is vertical and horizontal representation. Reinventing your career in disruptive times is again something that I use a lot in my coaching interventions. Insights are horizontal. In 3 levels of trust in relationship, and leaders need 3 kind of focus. It's more vertical orientation. Then we see the clouds, and the 9 rules of innovation, is coming from Greg Sattel, and information is really connected with each other in a way through clouds, but also demarcated from each other through the clouds. And then same thing can be said for 3 L's for self-directed. This was based out of my own TEDx talk a couple of years ago. And then there are visual templates like this. So a tree template which says, so if you draw a tree on a whiteboard and say, why are we doing what we're doing? How will we do it? And then what are those, some of these exact things that we will do? And let people paste sticky notes or, put their insights on the whiteboard. It becomes a really collaborative exercise that we can do with our people. There are 7 questions that we can ask for any initiative that our, coaches are initiating, which is why, what, who, when, where, how much, and how. These are questions that we can answer. We can just divide a board into the 6 or 7 parts and then let people stick their ideas on it. 3 steps to the future, or rather 3 bold steps to the future. This is a template that I used with one of my coaches that I shared as an example before. Where are we now? Where do we want to go in the future? And there's a huge gap in between that needs to be filled. There has to be a leap of, there has to be a quantum leap from now to the future. And to be able to do that, here are 3 things that we absolutely need to do. And these 3 things are written there after a whole lot of prioritization. You can do 10 things, but here are 3 that will have maximum impact on that transition. Similarly, then there is a template for retrospectives. You divide the whiteboard into 4 parts: ideas, what went well, lessons learned, and what are the improvements that we'll do. When you're doing very specific planning, we could also look at who will do what and by when. And this is sort of a checklist of actions that needs to be done when it's collaborative. Then we already looked at the meeting template, and then there is 5i template that I used also in the same coaching intervention, wherein we draw a question mark.
Then sorry to interrupt. 5 minutes are left, so maybe.
Yeah, sure. I think we are pretty close to it. All right. So bringing it all together, and in the next 5 minutes, I think what we want to do is that we again want to pick up the paper and pen, and I want us to represent the art of persuasion, which is the logos, ethos, and pathos. 3 things that persuade others, whether it is storytelling, whether it is coaching, whether it's communications, whether it is visual thinking. 3 things that really connect with others. So we connect with others at the level of logic, at the level of ethics and credibility, and at the level of emotion. If you could pick up your paper and pen and represent this idea visually in any structure that we saw before, or you can use the same structure that I've used here. You put a title, Art of Persuasion, 3 visual metaphors to represent logic, credibility, and emotion, and then put the ideas underneath. If you could do this and share it on the mural board, that'll be awesome. Maybe you can take a screenshot of this and do the visual later. Maybe you can do it now in the next few minutes. I think either of that.
I hope you would be sharing this PPT with all of our participants.
Oh, yes, I will. I certainly will. So I would really look forward to this as an exercise that you can do offline after the session. Or I would encourage that go watch your favorite TED Talk, find out 3 to 4 key ideas from the speaker, and represent it in this form to start with. That put a title at the top, write down those big ideas and leave some space for drawing, and then represent those ideas in some visual metaphors, and see how that connects with those people who you share this with, either on your social network or in your social circles. But I think that will be very interesting to see, and I really look forward to seeing some of your sketch notes and visual notes as well. And you can probably tag me as well when you share it.